So this whole topic has to do with sirtuins, and these are enzymes in the actual body itself, in the cells themselves, and they have been somewhat identified with longevity or increasing longevity. And when people do caloric restrictions, they actually stimulate the whole cycle, and these play a central role in a caloric restriction and longevity and increasing our ability to live longer. And we're going to get on to how this works, and let's get going. So the first thing, if I can do this, is actually a video that I want you guys to look at.
Ooh, cool. Are you rewinding it, or you're just showing us this now? Oh, he's showing us now. Mm.
I'm just opening the notes up. Keep this up in case anybody comes up. Sorry.
Okay, I've always loved this video.
Mm-hmm.
And the scene that gets me the most is the war. Anyways, enough. What's important about this video is adaptation, as you can see, and how we evolved through the times and the millennia. But the one thing that you have to keep in mind is that if we look at the world, it's about 400 billion years old. Lamarckian people would say it's only 4,600 years old. But the whole concept is we actually had a soup of environmental effects that actually led to the development of us as a human organism. That's from the science point of view. So when we looked at the Earth and how the Earth was cooling and changing, what happened was that we started looking at several molecules, and the most important, these molecules are very, very important. These are the hydrocarbons that actually help in developing proteins, and they make up the proteins. So they're carbon, they're hydrogen, and nitrogen, and the last one is oxygen. And interestingly enough, oxygen was the last to get developed because as the Earth was cooling down, water was starting to form, and it's from water that we actually get the oxygen molecule, which I found very interesting. Now, when there was time of a lot of abundance and there wasn't a lot of stress put on the environment, this is when we started developing all these what are called your nucleotides, or then your which form the backbone of a lot of the proteins. So adenine. So what you're seeing here is you're seeing carbon, carbon, nitrogen, and and hydrogen forming adenine. And this then, as we were progressing in the evolution, we'd also developed other nucleotides, which was uracil and thymine. The reason why these are put together here is because these two relate to each other. So adenine relates with uracil and adenine relates with thymine. And then on the other end, we have guanine and we have cytosine. So these actually form the amino acids, but very importantly, they form the backbone of what is your RNA. RNA was the first of the elements to get formed, and the important thing about it is you have to have an RNA for it to duplicate to form the DNA. And this is why this whole Moderna thing is very interesting right now, or Pfizer as well, is they're looking at the RNA. So if they can manipulate the RNA of the virus, and then when it goes to replicate and it forms the DNA, therefore you're putting information into the DNA that should help affect the virus and stop it from doing what it's doing. Interestingly enough, so during time of abundance, meaning there's a lot of environmental, food, oxygen, whatever, these cells replicate no problem. However, interestingly enough, as we progressed and we started and needed to adapt, we again went through other stressors. It's the stressors that actually are responsible for the development of a lot of these nucleotides, and which then went on to form your proteins and then your organisms. So when there's stress, interestingly enough, what happened was that gene A and gene B during time of abundance, if there's some stress, then the gene B would turn on to prevent the gene A from doing what it's wanting to do, which is reproduce, replicate, or help in replication. And that was a stress system to try to protect it from living. However, what happened was that if gene B only stopped at affecting gene A, this organism would die off, because as we progressed and adapted, gene B formed another gene, and that gene is the reason why we have longevity. And that's because what happens is, not only does it look at trying to help the cell survive, but more importantly, it looks at DNA damage. So what gene B1 alpha does is it actually looks at repairing any DNA damage. And that's where the sirtuins come in. They are looked upon as a means of helping remove any damage in the cells. Okay, you guys are with me so far? Now, this thing here is really interesting. We've seen this diagram before, but I've somewhat modified it to look at the green area. There is when there's abundance. And with abundance, we don't care about how the genes work with one another. What we're caring about is replicating, reproducing, because there's a lot of food out there, there's a lot of sunlight, there's a lot of oxygen, so we can continue doing one of the functions, which is to produce ourselves or reproduce ourselves. But when we actually have stress, the stress itself is a toxic response. And this is what happens in our bodies regardless. Like if you have a lot of stress in your body, you respond to it by developing a lot of what are known as reactive oxygen species, inflammation, and so on and so forth. So there's no difference as to how the cells were developed over the years as with regards to our body. Our body is just a big analog representation of the cells themselves. And by analog, what I'm referring to is an epigenetic quality. That means that my body will respond to the environment in certain ways, and there's noise involved with it. And by noise, we mean breakdowns, we mean disruption, where if we now look at the analogy, if we compare an analog to a digital, by digital, we're referring to the DNA, And what do we mean by that? The DNA is set. We know what we're going to, how it's going to replicate itself from the RNA. And there's not a lot of variance on it. With an analog body, there is a lot of variance, okay? So, and the key is to realize that when we go to a toxic disruption, it's when we start adapting. And that's the most important thing, is adaptation. This is what that whole video showed. It showed us adapting throughout the lifespan of the Earth and us as well. Now, interestingly enough, the idea of longevity was looked at in 1984 through yeast, and they still study yeast. The yeasts have the ability that if there's a lot of glucose in there, then the mother yeast cell continues to replicate and develop more daughters. However, if the food source is taken away from them, they basically will shut down. And now it's become, I've got to survive mode. And this is, I mean, if you think about it, training is almost the same thing. We're causing a stress in our bodies, and our body's response to stress is it has to survive. And it basically tries to adapt to the stressors of training. Well, we're, you know, if the bigger picture is us trying to survive to the stresses of our environment. So in 2001, they went to the nematodes, and again, we went from plant to an organism, an animal based like a nematode. But the interesting thing about it, and even when we went to the Drosophila, the interesting thing about all this is that all of them have the ability to survive. And we have the ability to be able to increase the longevity of these organisms by, one of the things that's been used a lot lately is caloric restriction. And interestingly enough, we're going to talk about how caloric restriction affects the Sirtuins. So the thing that I find interesting is that if we look at, and believe me, guys, this was very complicated stuff. The biochemistry is just amazing, but at the same time, I had to read about 20, 30 articles just to give you guys a glimpse of what we're looking at. Now, when we look at how the Sirtuins function, they are dependent on a nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. So that is a substance, a promoter within the cells itself. And Sirtuins need that in order to be able to be activated to allow us to develop the ability to handle stress. Now, what's interesting about here is that the Sirtuins have been divided into, there's 7 of them in the human body, where in the plant-based, there's actually just what is known as Sir2. So Sir stands for silent information regulator. The thing you got to keep in mind, which is very, very important, is that 2 things help us determine how we function and how we move forward from a day-to-day basis. The first is energy, and the second is information. And how those 2 work hand in hand is very, very important. And if we look at energy and we look at the human body, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the laws of thermodynamics. I mean, we all know the first one, that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. That's the thermodynamic law number 1. The one that I find interesting is thermodynamic law number 2, which means the body tends to entropy. Now, what that means is that left on its own devices, if we didn't have all these little systems inside our bodies to absorb energy, to take energy from the food that we eat to help develop the proteins, we're going to go to a state of equilibrium. Now, the best way to sort of describe that analogy is if you take a sugar cube and you drop it in a cup of coffee or tea, and then you let it dissolve. What happens is that the sugar cube will dissolve. It'll no longer be a cube structure. It'll become part of the environment. But if you were to now dehydrate or remove the coffee, or dehydrate the coffee, or what's the word I'm thinking of? Basically, burn the coffee off. I can't even think right now. You're not going to develop that sugar cube again. Okay. So that means equilibrium, and our lives head towards that direction as well, because when we die, our bodies become part of the environment itself. So it's an equilibrium state. So throughout our lives, we're trying to prevent that. And one of the best ways to try to prevent that is not only on nutrition, but how we handle stress in our bodies. How we adapt to that stress in our bodies is very important. And these Sirtuins actually are the system that helps us for adaptation and longevity. They've actually shown that Sirtuin 1, this one here, if you remove it and you create a knockout mice, so what basically a knockout mice means is that they've removed certain enzymes or certain proteins from that mouse to see what effect it would have. If you remove the Sirtuins from a knockout mouse, it actually increases their aging and they'll be dead within 4 weeks. So it's very, very important that this balance of how it works together helps us survive and replicate and reproduce and so on and so forth. Now, the thing that I find interesting is that I put together this idea of the 7 sins, because when we look at the Sirtuins in the mammals and the humans, there's 7 of them. So I thought, hey, let's have some fun. So the 7 sins of the Bible, when you look at this, we have, what's this? Gluttony. Oops, sorry. Go back. We have gluttony, we have greed, we have lust, we have pride, we have slothness, and we have, what's it when a person's, what's this one here? This one here is envy, and that's wrath, okay? However, interestingly enough, it affects our bodies, but and how we adapt, what stresses we put on ourselves, even though, okay, we're talking about the sins. Well, if you look at gluttony, and gluttony is, being obese or getting very fat, that affects your body from an inflammatory point of view, and we're going to talk about it further on. Especially, and now if you look at wrath, your sympathetic nervous system gets stimulated, fight, flight, or fright. You're putting more, how do you say, reactive oxygen species in your body. And sloth here, well, what do we say nowadays? Modern day is sitting down is the next cancer, or I think they say, or is it the next form of smoking or something like this? However, now let's look at the 7 modern sins. I don't know if you guys have ever remember seeing Monty Python, but that's Mr. Creosote. Has you guys ever seen that skit where I think that's Terry Jones playing this character here? He actually was convinced by one of the other actors in Monty Python about having a mint wafer, and as soon as he eats the mint wafer, he explodes. Anyways, if you see, interestingly enough, when we look at the 7 modern sins, gluttony is still part of it. Okay, we have smoking, we have alcoholism, we have here, the other one is fast food. I mean, fast food's been responsible for increasing the ability of type 2 diabetes amongst the human population. Okay, here we have mental, emotional stress. Sloth is still part of it, and obviously drugs and smoking. However, the thing you have to keep in mind, guys, is that age is an inflammatory response. So as we age, our telomeres, so when you're looking at the DNA and you're looking at chromosomes, at the far end of the chromosomes, there's these telomeres, and these are affected as we get older. They become less, their length is somewhat limited, so they become smaller. And this is all affected from our environment as well. What we put in our systems, how we relate to our environment, from, environmental stress, from all the pollutants that we have, these affect our longevity. Okay, so now when we look at age, the 7 big sins of age, or the deadly conditions, are obesity, type 2 diabetes, osteoporosis, cancer, rheumatoid arthritis, neurodegenerative diseases, and cardiovascular issues. And these are all affected at the cellular level and can be manipulated. And this is the interesting thing that they're doing with at Harvard University and several other places in the world looking at age, is if they can manipulate the sirtuins themselves, they can actually help with reversing age. Age is it's a disease. And this is the thing that blew my mind. It's a disease. It's a low-grade inflammatory disease. So what we're trying to do right now is we're trying to reverse this disease. And sirtuins form a very big sort of central part of reversing aging. Okay? So now these are the sirtuins themselves. And I want to draw your attention to the sirtuin 3, 6, and 1. The 1 and 6 are very, very important because they are within the nucleus itself. And these are the ones that are being manipulated. In fact, one study at Harvard University, when David Sinclair came to his lab, the lab head said to him, "We've got a problem here." He says, "What do you mean?" "Well, we have these mice and they're continuing to run and they're 20 months old." And this sort of piqued David Sinclair's interest. And they said, "Well, what happened?" "Well, we basically upped their sirtuin 1 levels and they just continued to run. But the problem is that they broke the treadmills." Now, a 20-month-old mouse is equivalent to a 65-year-old individual in human years. So what they were able to do was they were able to help sort of repair the DNA, because this is what we're looking at. We're looking at the DNA. If you repair the DNA, when the DNA splits during meiosis and then it allows the RNA, then the RNA can replicate itself and replicate a healthy cell or a healthy protein. So this is what we're looking at when we're looking at the nuclear sirtuins. Now, sirtuin 3 is in the mitochondria. And the mitochondria is very, very important because that's the metabolic site of the cells. So when you actually train and you're affecting your body by developing all the, how do you say, the byproducts of training, like oxidative stress, that's happening in the mitochondria itself. Oxidative stress is an inflammatory response. The key then is how we actually deal with inflammation. Now, let me get to the next slide. Now, we're looking at this idea of how you can manipulate the sirtuin levels and increase longevity. So what you see above is a rat that's having a normal diet or even an excessive diet, and the diet itself can cause, if it's too much, it can cause inflammation itself. So the fact is that food itself, too much of it is an inflammatory response. So, but when you're looking at caloric reduction, you're looking at reducing the effects of on the body itself, because remember what we said about adaptation? You're starving the body right now. So the body's response to starvation is to protect itself. It needs to protect itself because it needs to survive. And what happens with caloric reduction is, up here with the rat that's eating normal is an obese rat, and you have inflammation. At the cellular level, at the nucleus itself, you have this promoter, pro-inflammatory promoter called nuclear factor kappa beta. And what that does is it affects, remember when we went back here? What it does is when you have a release of nuclear factor kappa beta, it affects the nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. Now, this is one of the rate determining steps, because in order for the sirtuins to work, they need this molecule. But when you have inflammation in your body, which is what age is, it's inflammation in your body, and you're releasing this NFK beta, nuclear factor kappa beta, it actually decreases the concentration of NSCA plus, actually, and then it decreases the sirtuin levels, okay? And you start aging, okay? So what happens in this mouse here from a caloric reduction and even exercise itself is you're actually helping increase the sirtuin levels in order to help you survive. And this is what they think right now, or know, or what they postulate is what's helping us to reverse aging. Okay, so, and as we looked at the other 7 deadly conditions of age, they're all inflammatory based. And inflammation is the one thing that we have to look at. So the question then becomes, how do we help ourselves through diet? Okay, besides caloric restriction, there are foods out there that actually help with giving you more sirtuins in order to help you build that robust system. So, and oddly enough, guys, I don't know how many mediators are in this group, but when you look at the foods rich in sirtuins, none of them are red meats, none of them are fish, none of them are chicken, nothing. It's all plant-based stuff. Maybe because when the plants were developing themselves, because they have sirtuins themselves, they actually looked at developing a system of being able to survive. And when we look at these foods here, and yes, coffee is one of them, black coffee, of course, these are the ones that are high in sirtuin levels and actually can help in our diet. So when we're looking with our young athletes, we can actually have them eat, you know, these, or have these as part of their diets if they so wish. The interesting thing too is that when we continue looking at the North American diet, which is, you know, McDonald's, fast food, processed food, and all this stuff, this actually affects the body because it actually causes inflammation in our cells. So what we said earlier on is that if we have inflammation in our bodies, it actually affects the NCA plus, which is the nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. And when that decreases, that means that the sirtuins decrease, and we're having a spike in inflammation in our bodies and the breakdown. So the bottom thing that I can leave you guys with regards to this small talk on sirtuins is that we could technically reverse aging by looking at how our bodies respond to caloric restrictions, and more importantly, by adapting in a manner that we're not going to cause as much inflammation in our bodies, because inflammation is the big thing that can affect and cause damage to the DNA. And interestingly enough, as we were progressing from 4 billion years ago to where we are right now, it's how we minimize the damage on the DNA, which is very important. And this is where those genes were also developed, because as we were developing, as our organisms were developing, we also had the effect from solar flares, ultraviolet radiation that was also causing damage to the DNA. So there was a shift with regards to the gene itself shutting down the whole cell system in order to survive. And this is what has allowed us to develop this whole science of aging and where we're at right now. So that's the question. That's the end. I hope you guys have a lot of questions. And that's it.
You said in the talk, Nikos, that if you take away the SIT1 part, would that not have a knock-on effect to the rest of the body? Can you actually take away the SIT1 and still survive healthy as a human?
Well, you're looking at a whole network, but what these scientists in aging have looked at is the importance of SIRT1 and SIRT6. So if you remove SIRT1, you may have the ability to continue, but the network itself is affected, which is very, very important to sort of keep the whole system a whole. Like, I mean, if we look at the whole concept of an analog, if we look at the whole concept of the body, if we remove, let's say, our, obviously, if you remove your liver, you're dead. But even your gallbladder, I know some patients that actually remove their gallbladder. Well, then their digestive system is affected. And even though they're able to survive, or even if you remove one kidney, you're still able to survive, your whole system is not as robust anymore, which is very important. Now, how does this help with athletes? Well, I think if we actually realize that any stress that's put on the body is going to cause inflammation because it's a breakdown. We're breaking down the proteins, we're breaking down our muscles and all this thing. I think it's I think a combination of maybe looking at putting that's not me. That's not me. Of putting together proper diet, sleep, or anything that actually helps to continue the ability to help the body recover and adapt is very important. Any other questions?
I think Mick posted one, Nikos.
Oh, I'm not into the chat thing.
Yeah, sorry. Just a question about, is there any evidence, if we eat lots of food with lots of sirtuins in it, does it actually get taken up, or does it, it's like taking a multivit and it just goes straight through and down the toilet, so to speak?
That's a really good question. And like I said, I did a lot of reading, and what they're looking at is that if you actually increase the amount of sirtuins in your diet, that actually gets taken up by the cells themselves. Now, here you talked about vitamins and flushing down the toilet. If you take a whole, and this is something that I've actually looked at for years, is that if you actually take a whole vitamin and you crush it up, you're more likely to absorb it as opposed to it being one tablet or one pill, because they've basically have like a gluing factor together with the vitamins themselves that they've put in there, the B complexes, the A's and all this. And that gluing sort of way of putting it together affects it from being absorbed in the body.
Thank you, Dad. Sure, Pauline.
So my question, I put the link to the book from David Sinclair in the chat. Yeah. The question is it just the food? I thought it was about stresses. I thought about
exactly
taking cold showers every morning for 2 minutes or something.
Exactly.
Like that.
It's about stressful. And this is great that you brought this up, because the whole idea is being able to adapt to the stress. And if the stress is actually affecting the cells in a way where the cell needs to survive, then it kickstarts this whole system of sort of, because when there's a stress, so the stress itself causes what is known as a reactive oxygen species, or ROS, or oxidation. And what oxidation is just basically that you're putting a toxin in the body itself. So that stress needs to be removed. And if you don't remove that stress, what it does is it increases the nuclear factor kappa beta that we talked about. And that in itself is what causes an increase in inflammation, because in order to have that inflammation, you have to have that promoter cell in the cells. But if you're causing a stress which forces the body to survive, then it kickstarts this whole system of releasing the sirtuins in order to basically remove any damage on the DNA and then move forward, which is very important. But the one thing that needs to get stressed a lot is that aging is an inflammatory response. It's a disease. If we look at it from that point of view, then technically from what David Sinclair said, and a lot of other aged people, that we can actually increase our lifespan. And interestingly enough, like I said to you guys about the mouse that was 20 months old, and it was the equivalent of 65 years. So technically, we should be able to train at a high level as well, if we actually look at how our diet affects our bodies, sleep. Even the circadian rhythm is affected by the Sirtuins. So. And what they found is that with the circadian rhythm, and I've got a note here on it, it's basically, it says it's connected to the Sirtuin 1 because if Sirtuin 1 is affected, so basically meaning that if you are causing inflammation in your body, and we've shown that throughout the day, there are certain pro-inflammatory proteins that are released in the body, like interleukin-1, tumor necrosis factor alpha, that if they are predominantly released through a negative stressor on the body, it affects the sirtuin levels, which then will increase aging and decrease metabolism. I hope you guys understood a lot of this, because it was a very complex biochemistry to get into, Yeah, I know. I agree.
We just get our athletes to drink beetroot juice every morning or something.
Well, I mean, you did see red wine was in there, and there's a thing called
That's for coaches.
Yeah, resveratrol, I think it's called. And resveratrol, I actually started using this just to see if it actually, and it's grape juice, it's grapeseed extract, and to see if that will actually help kickstart the ability to develop more sirtuins in the body itself, or helps to increase the concentration of sirtuins in the body.
What did you say? Resveratrol?
Resveratrol.
But anything with an all is supposed to be bad, like Dianabol,
Don't start that.
I don't know about.
I'm not doing it. Ends with an OL.
I don't know about that one. That's a new one to me. Dianabol, stanazolol. Well, actually, you have to look at the rings. So I think diazepam or stanazolol, they have a benzene ring attached to it, and it's the benzene ring that, in organic chemistry, it's a hexagon ring that basically is responsible for being carcinogenic as well. Yeah.
Did you come across anything to do with supplements that improve your uptake of?
The resveratrol is the only one that I've come across right now, besides diet and caloric restriction, because what caloric restriction does is it actually increases the NAD plus concentration. And remember, the NAD plus is very, very important, because the sirtuins need that to get activated themselves. So that's how caloric restriction works. It would be interesting to see if when I was an athlete, as a rower, and I wanted to drop weight, I had this grandiose idea that I would actually stop eating at about 4 o'clock. And this is this was back in the early 80s. Yeah, early 80s. I just had this idea. If I wanted to drop weight for rowing, I would just stop eating around 4 o'clock in the afternoon and not eat anything till about after my morning practice the next day, which would be about 9 or 10 o'clock. Indirectly, I was doing what was called an intermittent fast.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, the one thing that I found is that I had a lot of energy, which was bizarre. So now I'm looking at the science now. And here's something else that I've been doing recently, and I'm going to share this with you guys, is I make this concoction every night, which consists of about 5,000. Mike Chimello knows this, because the first thing he said to me is, "Don't you have diarrhea?" Anyways, I ingest about 5,000 milligrams of vitamin C, and then 6,000 units of vitamin D3, 4,000 units of B12, 2,000 units of niacin. Why am I mentioning niacin? Because niacin is actually related to nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide. And when I saw that, the other thing is tryptophan. I don't know if you guys have heard of tryptophan, but tryptophan as well is actually, they're somewhat related. So when I saw B3, there was a guy named Dr. Hoffer who many, many, many years ago said that we needed to supplement our B3, which is niacin. And now I can see where he's coming from, because the niacin may in fact help increase the concentration of NAD+, which actually helps with sirtuins. Now, where am I going with this? I actually had a pretty bad toothache about 3 or 4 weeks ago. And then I started taking the niacin and the vitamin C and the B complex. And I kid you not, I couldn't bite on the left side of my mouth because of the tooth. And ever since I've started taking that concoction, I'm able to bite and take a bite out of an almond as well. So I'm thinking, this is bizarre. The other thing too is that I suffered a pretty bad bicycle accident about three years ago, where I was doing about 30 kilometers an hour, took a turn, and then there was a wet wooden bridge. And as you can tell, I slid underneath. And I've had a pretty bad Charlie horse on my right hip. Ever since I started this concoction, now I'm able to sleep on my right side. So could it be that my body now is somewhat recovering, and by giving it the B3, that it's helping with any damage?
Or is it your micro stretching you're doing every night?
Oh, that's true.
Or have you just learned to isolate?
I mean.
But true. But again, if we go back to what Joy just said right now, stop laughing, Chamello. But if we go back to what Joy said right now about microstretching, what is the one thing that I've often said about microstretching, which is very, very important, is we don't want to cause any more tissue damage, because if we have inflammation in there already, we want to sort of ameliorate or remove the inflammation. So could it be that this is just a theory out there, but could it be that the microstretching itself actually helps with diminishing inflammation? I mean, I do look younger. I mean, there you go.
We didn't see you before.
How did you work out the
I've not
amounts,
seen you
Nico?
before April of last year, so.
Well, just picture Malcolm with a beard.
Nikos,
No.
how did you work out the amounts of each vitamin and supplement to take there in your concoction?
Well, first and foremost, with vitamin C, the quick test is if you actually take too much, you are going to have diarrhea. And I'll give you a funny story. I was in Vancouver, and I missed the concentration by about I'd say
A gallon.
close to it tenfold. So I instead of giving myself 2,500 milligrams of vitamin C, I gave myself 25,000.
Yeah.
And I tell you, man, I couldn't get to the bathroom quick enough. Now, that's for the vitamin C. So you have to play around with that to find out where your body can tolerate. Mine can tolerate upwards to about 7,500 to 10,000. Anything greater than that, then I'm actually in the bathroom. Now, for the B12, the other thing you got to realize with vitamins, and I know Jimson's going to speak to this more because he's going to talk about supplementations in one of our talks, is that when you're looking at vitamins, A, D, E, and K are the vitamins that if you take too much of them, you can actually develop toxic levels, because A, D, E, and K are stored in our fat. Okay? Vitamins B12 and vitamin C's, or vitamin B complexes and C complexes, are flushed out of our bodies. Okay? So Now, for the vitamin B12, I just basically said the RDA suggests about 1,000. I've actually went up to about 3,000 or 4,000 myself. With vitamin D3, they suggest about 3,000 units. I've just doubled it myself, and I just said A, D, and K. So I have to be really, really careful. But the fact is, because we're now into winter here, I do about 6,000 units of D3 because I'm not getting as much sun.
Yes.
Now, the B3, the person who's the father, and let me bring up this guy's name because it's very, very important. If you guys can do some research on this guy, because he, I started reading about him a lot. Abram Hoffer. In fact, what I'll do is I will send you guys there's only 2 articles on this. So let me get to our microstretching group here.
You sure it wasn't
And-
Linus Pauling?
No, Linus Pauling was vitamin C.
C. Yeah.
But Linus Pauling, which actually Joy was a famous guy at Berkeley University. And he actually has the distinction of, I think, having he's a Nobel Prize laureate and would have got the second one, but Watson and Crick beat him to the development of the DNA helix. Linus Pauling was working on that one. But Linus Pauling was taking upwards to about 30,000 units of vitamin C a day. And he thinks that actually, I have a book on vitamin C and cancer by Linus Pauling on my bookshelf over there. But Abram Hoffer. So let me find out. Let me, why don't I just do this here, Google, and
My mom's has always been into vitamin C since we've been little.
Yeah, no, and vitamin C is really good.
We took a vitamin since I was 3 years old, probably 4 years old. Vitamin C every day. My parents made us take. I just took them.
And the thing is, it's like I said, you can't overdose on vitamin C, but you can actually
overdosing. Come on.
What?
You have diarrhea. That's overdose.
Oh,
Yeah.
You're not going to die. Sorry. Where, in the old days, what is it with the sailors? They developed scurvy.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that was a vitamin C deficiency.
Yeah.
And isn't interestingly enough, the UK people can help me on this one, but why are you guys called limeys?
Because you used to take lime for the vitamin C, the sailors, because they never had tablets at the time.
I see.
And one of the most famous ones was the Bounty, Mutiny on the Bounty.
Yep.
Captain Bligh, he was one of the first ones to actually start insisting on taking citrus fruit because he knew it helped. He was mad in other ways, but he was quite clever in those ways.
Okay.
And that's why it's called lime use, because they used to take lime, and whenever we sailed to, used to load up the ship with limes to come back with.
Okay, there you go.
So Nikos, I got a question for you.
Sure.
I work in the Navy base, Nikos.
Sorry?
I work in the Navy base. What can I tell you?
Well, the one thing I can tell you about the Navy is they did pickle Lord Admiral Nelson.
Yep.
That's how
So
they got
Nikos,
him.
we talk about dehydration and urination color. So how do you tell if you're dehydrated? Because your urine's got to be like fluorescent green with all your vitamins.
Well,
Yeah.
not necessarily. I mean, it's not fluorescent green, but again, you're looking at the discoloration. If it's very, very dark, then I'm dehydrated. End of story. So it really doesn't matter about the amount of vitamins you're taking or whatnot.
It's the dark.
It's the color itself. And let me just put this other one here. So, okay, so you guys, I'm sending off the PDFs on Hoffer and this whole idea of niacin. He suggests upwards to about 3,000 units of niacin. Now, if you guys start taking niacin, there is a weird reaction. So it's very, very important that you start really, really low. So I start off with 500 micrograms. What happens is your circulatory system just explodes and you feel heat,
Oh,
feel like you get a rash, your face is red. Like I literally, the first time I took niacin, I thought to myself, what the hell did I just do? And I went in front of a mirror and I looked as red as a lobster.
sounds like it's menopause.
That's a good one. No, but men do go through menopause.
Yeah,
They do.
menopause.
Another supplement.
Menopause.
Wet, hot, you know,
Another s-
it could be something with the,
Oh, definitely.
the
I
levels
agree.
of niacin. I mean,
Well, like again,
Right?
the thing exactly like Jimson has said, we're all an experiment because all of us have taken the notion right now, especially with the time off that we had, to basically look at how we can respond to detraining or training or vitamins. And I've looked at supplementing myself with a lot of these vitamins, and so far it's been positive. Now, interestingly enough, if you think about it, our food source worldwide is being depleted of a lot of minerals. So it's very, very important that you look at your zincs and your magnesiums and your copper and your niacin to supplement those, because the soil is being depleted. And interestingly enough, like when we went to, you guys saw all the food sources, and Richie's now got the PowerPoint presentation, so he'll upload it. So you'll see all of them. They have kale in there. I don't know if you guys eat kale, but kale, there was a doctor that went on to say that if you eat too much kale, it's
Yep.
toxic.
yep, heard that. Heard
But you know where the toxicity comes from?
what?
The kale absorbs a lot of the metals in the soil. So
Oh,
the cobalts, the manganese, which actually causes it to become toxic. It's not the plant itself. It's what's in the soil that affects the plant and allows, and this is why they call it a toxic plant, but it had everything to do with what it's being absorbed. Now, when I was living in England, I, at one time, was a raw food eater. And why am I bringing this up? Because a lot of the food that was shown in that slide, I actually, for some unknown reason, intuitively just started eating like bagfuls. And one of them is oregano, or what we call rocket. Rocket's got
Yeah.
this sort of peppery type taste to it. And it's actually one of the foods that has sirtuin in it. And what I used to do, and people thought I was crazy, is I used to, for my protein, because I'm a vegan, for my protein, what I would do is I would actually boil lentils. No, nothing else, just boil them with water and then drain them. And then I would take the lentils and I would take a bell pepper, red, yellow, whatever, green, and then I would remove the guts inside of it, and I would stuff it with lentils and rocket.
Yep.
And then I would eat it like an apple.
great. That sounds
And
good.
again, it's just that indirectly, I didn't know this, but I was actually helping sort of replenish or work with the Sirtuin system, and it was caloric restriction as well. You know, I wasn't really eating a lot. Caloric restriction doesn't mean, you know, fasting. It means decrease your proportions. You know.
Because just
Yo.
on that sort of so are you kind of advocating post training rather than eat, you put off eating so that that caloric restriction stimulates the recovery regeneration? Is that sort of summary of what you kind of laid out a little bit?
I think, yeah, if we do some caloric restriction post training, it actually will help with now you got to be very careful with that too, because one of the things that's very, very important is after. So again, we have to look at the time frame, and I'm not, how do you say, an expert on this thing, but I'm thinking that after training, we've got a window of opportunity about 2 hours to replenish glucose and glycogen. And the interesting thing about sirtuins, and with my research that I looked at, sirtuins also, from a metabolic point of view, try to conserve our highest source of energy. That highest source of energy is our carbohydrates. So what it tends to do then is it actually tends to try to find other energy sources from the other food sources, like fat. So getting back to the 2 hours post, I think that's the time when you actually need to replenish your glucose and your glycogen. And maybe, so if the athlete finishes at, let's say, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, they should have their meal within those 2 hours and then do the caloric restriction later, is what I would think. See what I'm, see, Mick, what I'm getting at? Yeah. Because you need to basically replenish the glucose and glycogen that's been depleted from the muscle and the neural system itself. And then once that's done, then you can start your caloric restriction for the next day.
We've heard a lot about that in the like usually after hard training in 30 minutes to have some type of good carbo protein. And it suggested the most complete food product was chocolate milk. You know, there was the whole trend on that. But what if you can't have dairy? Then what?
Well, that's a good question. Like, I'm not a dairy eater, so myself,
what's your thing like that?
My source of protein, my source of carbohydrates, again, I would go to the plant-based stuff, and it would be the lentils, the bell peppers, the rockets. That's what I would look at myself.
Okay.
You know,
I would go to casein.
Casein is, yeah.
Because the whole thing about this chocolate milk thing, Joy, was slow release out of the stomach, slow, gradual, progressive release out of the stomach.
Mm-hmm.
Casein protein powder gives you that anyway, without the sugar, without the and all the other rubbish that's flavorings and
sounds
all
great.
this.
Yeah.
So you can mix it with water, milk, whatever you like, and you can put creatine in it if you wish. So obviously with my daughter being a type 1 diabetic, the chocolate milk was just,
No, that's good to know. So not extra sugars and stuff. That's good, Alan. Thanks.
Yep. Just use the casein protein.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is Nesquik.
Nesquik.
Yeah.
Again, a lot of
You
sugar
mean
in
the
that.
Nestle, the Nestle Quick with the little rabbit and
They make the non-dairy oat
colorings.
Probably Ovaltine then too.
Ovaltine.
I love Ovaltine.
I mean, I don't know. Did you guys, when you saw that video of that I showed you earlier on, did you notice how many of those people there that were part of our lives? Martin Luther King, that whole girl, that naked girl that in Vietnam, the Beatles.
Yeah.
And the one that really got me is the cell phones.
Oh, yeah.
How they all changed in that whole, remember the floppy disks and the Zelda, and it's just amazing, that history there just flashed right in front of our eyes. It's just unbelievable. Yeah.
The phone in the box, remember? The phone in the box.
Mm-hmm.
And you put it in your car and plug it in the the lighter thing for.
Yeah, this is foreign for Mike Chimello because he's too young, but
yeah.
You know. Anything else?
We can save the whole talk about the post-workout recovery for another talk, because we can talk all day on that.
Yes.
There are so many different options, from zero food for growth hormone release to pure protein, to protein and carbs 1-to-1, 2-to-1,
complementary protein,
4-to-1.
Did we talk about that before, Jimson?
No,
not really.
Oh.
No.
I mean, Malcolm put it on here, rice and beans. Rice and beans are, and actually brown rice and beans are, a full source of protein. And interestingly enough, I mean, we've all been manipulated to some extent by the dairy producers, by the meat producers. Do you know that 2 cups of lentils has more protein than one steak per gram
No.
wise.
Really?
Yeah,
Broccoli's very high in protein too.
but who
What?
eats 2
What did you
cups
say?
of lentils? That's a lot of lentils.
It's a lot. Yeah.
I mean, it's just
Tim,
like
what did
a
you
little
just say?
thing.
No, I was telling Alan before, like I've switched 3 days a week. I have baked beans for breakfast,
Oh,
which I love, which is, a very Scottish thing, but I absolutely love it.
cool.
Yeah.
It's very British too. Beans on toast.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, oh,
Baked
yeah.
beans on sourdough, wholemeal toast after training. Perfection.
Malcolm, that picture of me in Puerto Rico now, I've lost about 40 pounds. 40 pounds. Yeah. Funnily enough, it's just obesity is an inflammatory response. It's inflammation, and how we basically deal with that will affect our health or not. I mean, Tom, you've been silent. You going to say anything?
He's
He's
blank.
He's probably busy with a client. Some of us work. Some of us work for a living here.
I work. Yesterday I was treating patients. So I was actually hands-on.
Bending them back into shape.
Actually, interestingly enough, the lady that I was working with, Mike Chimello, knows this lady. She's 62 years old and she's very overweight, but she was suffering from a knee issue, her right knee, and she was doing other forms of therapy for several months. And every time she would finish, she'd come home and she'd be in excruciating pain. Where am I going with this? Inflammation again. But when I started working with her, now it's been 10 weeks. Prior to that, she wasn't even able to walk. Now she's actually every other day or so, she trains 6 days a week, which consists of only 15 minutes of treadmill one day, 15 minutes of walking, bicycling the other day, and then senior Zumba. And then Richie's on. And then
He's on playground duty. He's out there yelling at kids.
And then now she's able to walk. She's losing the weight. But the thing is, again, we are actually the first target is not to cause inflammation in the body, which is very, very important. I mean, we know that when we train, we are causing inflammation. We're causing reactive oxygen because we're breaking down our proteins and we're having all this damage in our bodies. And then we have to be able to figure out ways of removing that from our bodies. And several ways is one is to do something that actually helps diminish inflammation. Like I'm going to say this, proper stretching. The other thing is diet, sleep. These are very, very important things that we have to look at in order to diminish inflammation.
Excellent.
Yep. Sleep is a big one.
Oh, it's huge. I mean, I can't believe it's almost 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
I talked that long? Jesus.
Yeah.
But did you guys enjoy this? Like, honestly, because I mean, it was a little too scientific. Literally, I kid you not. I've taken about 30 pages of typed notes just to basically grasp my head around this thing. And the one thing that sort of stuck out is if we looked at this whole cycle itself, we have to look at how inflammation affects the, like I said, the NAD, the NAD+, which is, as we said, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, okay? And then how if we have a decrease in that concentration, it decreases our Sirtuin 1 and Sirtuin 6 levels, which then means it actually makes us age faster.
And Nikos, I'd never even heard of NAD before, and I want to go research it and look. But you were definitely very scientific for me, which was great because it causes me to go and want to research. So.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, there was no other way to approach this. I think the only thing that comes down to our level is stress and remove ourselves from stress, negative stress, de-stress, as opposed to eustress, because it's very, very important because some stress of the body is needed. And if we're looking at, like Jimson touched upon it when he said cold showers, the whole idea that I think one of you guys brought up the idea of the mitochondria and how the mitochondria is affected, because it's at the mitochondria that we actually have the biggest source of development of ATP, which is, as you guys know, is what we need in order to train. So adenosine triphosphate, ATP, when it breaks down to ADP and plus the phosphate, and it's the phosphate that gets used for the energy level. Well, it's in the mitochondria that happens. But interestingly enough, it's the NAD from the nucleus that releases an electron that gets taken up by the mitochondria that then allows us to develop that ATP and develop that source of energy that we need, which is very, very important. You know.
Well, I put a couple of ideas on the chat. Maybe we can just try some of these as our own experiment. Like someone can try cold.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not doing cold showers.
Oddly enough, there's a very famous guy who does cold showers, and he's known as the Iceman. Have you guys heard of Wim Hof?
Wim Hof. Yes.
Wim Hof. I mean, this guy is just, apparently he went up to Everest or did a climb with just shorts.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah, but he basically, his whole idea is he's practicing a technique known as Jitomo. Jitomo was one of the Naropa yoga techniques. There's 6 of them. And Naropa looks at basically developing the inner fire. And what Jitomo does, and the guy who's really versed in this, and he's still alive, is a guy by the name of Herbert Benson out at Harvard University. He developed a book called The Relaxation Response. And what he showed was they would take these monks and they would go in a meditative state, and they would actually measure their ability to develop inner heat, you know, through meditation. Now, in Tibet, in order for you to pass these levels, they, with regards to Jitomo, is they take you into a cave where it's about 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's, you know, it's fairly cold. And then they drape a cloth on your body, and you've got an hour to dry it off through a meditative state.
Wow.
And they have to do it 3 times. And they accomplish that through meditation. So this whole idea of the relaxation response, the whole idea of practicing creating that inner heat is what Wim Hof does too, through his breathing techniques and his whole idea. Like, I mean, this guy will sit in an ice bath, like a box, and, you know, people in a mall, people walking backwards and forwards, and he would sit there encased in ice. And here's the interesting thing is he's developed a system where he actually helps diminish inflammation in his body. So it's diminishing that inflammatory response. So by diminishing that inflammation, maybe he's helping increase the NAD plus and the sirtuin levels.
Wait, what about the Finnish? You know, how they've always been into the saunas and then jump into the ice pools and go back into the sauna. I mean, we're talking about, okay, the yoga or the monks did that, and Wim Hof did that, but is it really maybe it's the Finns?
Well, no, I mean, obviously, all the Nordic people did a lot of that stuff, and they still continue to do that. Like, I mean, some of them will just cut a hole in a lake and just dip themselves in there. You know.
Yeah, but the Finnish friends I know end with vodka. If you talk about the Finnish, so that's probably not the best for recovery. Might make you feel good, but not the same kind of recovery Nico's talking about.
Okay. Then in the morning they take an ice shower because they feel bad.
Yeah, definitely. But I hope this presentation is food for thought, especially from a dietary point of view. From
no pun intended.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and I like the idea of Jimson giving us that sort of 4 things to try. Cold showers, I don't know. I can get to lukewarm. What is it about it, man? I mean, is it obviously it's a mental thing. You know, it's that shock that, oh, and you can really feel it, but you have no problem jumping in a lake. So
For me, cold showers is just whoever gets in line last gets.
Yeah.
Whoever's up the
definitely.
latest or up the
I've
last.
been married for 28 years. That's why I do it.
That's it.
No, in Houston, about 9 months out of the year, the water is kind of lukewarm anyway. So I don't even turn on hot water until it gets to be like really cold and the water in the pipes are too cold. And sometimes it's not even a cold shower. It's like, oh, let me have a lukewarm shower out of the cold water. So yeah, I have to jump in the neighbor's pool for cold water.
Anyhow, so this has been, I learned a lot by doing my research on this stuff. And if you guys want, I mean, Tim, I could send you all the articles. It's just a lot of stuff, but it was a really good sort of way of me learning and then trying to teach you guys about this biochemistry of the Sirtuins. And according to David St. Clair, there is no reason why, if we continue on this path, because they're looking at, the most important thing is to keep in mind is that they're looking at age as a disease. It's not a process that we're all going to be exposed to. It's a disease. So if you take that attitude, they think, with a lot of the research that's being done worldwide, and Harvard, Stanford, they're world leaders, is that we may be able to reverse the effects of age. And sorry,
last question: is the book worth it?
Huh?
Is the book worth it?
The book is very well worth. And let me pull it up.
And Nico, what you could do too is all those articles, you could maybe just cut and paste links or cut and paste stuff onto one page and then post that on the thing, or email it to me and I'll post it on the drive.
He sent the niacin article, Richie, in our email.
Yeah.
It's good.
No, I know. But he said he had a bunch of other articles.
Oh,
I'm saying,
okay.
instead of having to send a bunch, you just put them all in one thing.
So I'll tell you how much worth it is. This is my working copy.
Oh, wow.
Right.
Mhm.
And I'm going to show you this, why I'm showing you this.
Oh, highlighted.
And this is my pristine copy.
Wow.
I keep this on the shelf. This one I do all my notes in. It's well worth it.
Okay.
It's called Lifespan: Why We Age and Why We Don't Have to.
Yeah, I put the links on the chat, so they can,
you did.
The paper.
It's an eye opener.
Yeah, but the paperback version is not coming out till May.
Yeah.
So it's expensive now, but if you want to wait till May, you can buy it. So,
but
or Kindle's out now.
And you know, the thing is, again, it actually will pique your interests and and sort of, I hate to say this, food for thought. You know.
Okay.
Oh, I get one for my mom too.
Huh?
Shall I get one for my mom too?
I think it's a good read, really is. And this guy writes it in such a way where I've taken a lot of his ideas about how to sort of present this to you guys. So on that note, for next week, what's the topic?
I think Richie had a topic as well. Richie wanted to do one on speed training.
Yeah, I can do that next week.
Okay. Now, for next week, I'm going to miss about 15 minutes because Mike and I have a meeting with some guys from Vancouver. So,
okay.
But I'll be back on again. So any last thoughts, any last ideas? I mean, this has been a little, to honestly say, it was a bit over my head as well. And I tried to sort of put a whole spin that we could somewhat understand it. You know?
Well, the pictures with the, it was so colorful, that food pictures. I think that was easy to sort of, you had that there. And so we could kind of relate a little more to, oh, this, oh, that is in that. Oh, this is in that. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What does it do?
Made it good.
Yeah. It wraps around it a little bit better.
And then the thing that I found interesting is walnuts.
Oh yeah.
Walnuts are high in it.
This guy named Jim Quick that does a lot of brain and reading research in clinics and stuff. He his blueberries calls them brain berries, and the walnuts is funny because it's like the shape of a brain. So yeah, you know, I mean, it's kind of interesting. And those are one of the things, you know, that Michael, I think you might know about him. But anyway, it's some good stuff. But that's one of the, you know, good power foods, for instance.
Yeah, exactly, definitely. So I guess that's it. Thanks for listening to me. I hope I didn't bore you guys.
No.
It's be good.
Excellent, Nikos.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Nikos.
Thank
Talk
you
to you
very
next
much,
week.
Nikos.
Hey,
Everybody
Next
bye.
week, guys.
Hey,
Bye now.
Jimson, hold on, Jimson and Tim.
Yep.
Yeah.
Tim, did you ever find that recording?
I have looked everywhere and I cannot find it.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so
I
Jimson,
found a
what may
30-second snippet from the same day. That's all I can find.
okay.
Is that the proprioception one?
It was
No,
it was
Epsom
August
salts.
4th or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I was driving my son to North Carolina. So Jimson, what may happen is, because I didn't think of this till after I put it on you as host, I don't know where that recording goes. You may get an email, or I may get it. So I don't know what happens with that.
Jimson,
Okay.
where do you know where the emails go? Like if you do it on your account. See, I'm trying to think, like I have 3 different Google accounts and I wonder if I
Here's what you do. Don't worry about that. If you go to Zoom,
right?
like just the website and log in on that, whatever one you were on, and look, you sign in, then you look on the left, there's meetings, other stuff. There's a link for recordings.
Yeah.
And you go down and look at your recordings. The bad part is, I think well, no, yours should be fine. Mine, after a while, the school wipes them out, so I would do them out. So I didn't go back that far. They had gotten wiped out way back that far, but yours, it still may be on there for that.
All right, I'm gonna I didn't know you could do that, so I'm gonna go and look.
Yeah.
Okay, I was looking at like my hard drive and my Google, not Zoom. Okay.
Yeah, no, they've got a place there. If it were, and I don't know, it may not even done that. Who knows? So anyway, Jimson, let me know if you find out. I'll look, and if I have it, I'll put it up.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right, guys. So next week, later.
Yeah. See you guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.